TV.
Welcome everybody, my name is Leon Verrooy and this is a new edition of Playgrounds TV In Depth. And today we have a very special guest. She's an illustrator, she's an animator, she's a storyboarder and she's a top graphic novelist conquering the world with her new graphic novel Days of Sand. May I have a warm applause for Aimée de Jongh. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome in our studio.
Thank you.
I was looking forward to this for a long time already, so I'm really happy that you could make it. We have a lot to discuss, but you are like a really, really hard worker. So we're going to check out. I got to know you a little bit by, it's a Dutch word, snippers. It's hard to say in English. It's like little pieces, snippets.
Snippets, yeah,
Snippets.
it's little pieces of paper. So if you tear a piece of paper apart, you get snippers.
Yeah, snippets.
And the idea of the title was that I show little bits of my life. Some are true, some are false. And so there are little snippets of my life in this comic.
And you did it on a really, almost a daily base?
It was daily, yeah. It was a comic I made for a newspaper in the Netherlands. So here you see two examples. It was always at the bottom of a page, always 3 or 4 images. So it had to be a very short gag. And I did it for about 5 years. So 5 years long, I made this comic every day. Yeah, it was a very long relationship.
And I can imagine that it really steers your life in that sense, that you have to make it like so many for that long.
Yeah, it was, in the beginning, it was more work than at the end of the whole trip, because at some point I got so quick in drawing and thinking of the jokes, and I got a little routine. So I remember in the beginning I would take like 5 days to make 5 comics for 1 week. But at the end I could make 5 comics in 1 day. And that would mean I would have 4 more days in my week to do other jobs. So you could say that I got faster and I found my routine in making this comic. But at the same time, that was a reason for me to stop doing it, because it became a bit of... It became boring. It was all automatic, you know.
Became a pattern.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so I still enjoyed the drawing. I still enjoyed making the little jokes. I got a lot of good responses. There was one survey of the newspaper, and they asked the readers, what is the item in the newspaper that most of you read? And the comics were number 1. So that's that's great. And we also made some albums with those comics, some anthologies. And those were also very popular. So it was, for the start of my career, because I started when I was 22 with this comic, and I finished when I was 27. So for the beginning of my career, it was a really good job to begin with, because I had an audience. I could, take my freedom to draw what I wanted and experiment a little bit with my drawing style. The editors of the newspaper just gave me complete freedom. I never received one email like, we don't think this is funny, or you should change this or that. Never. So that was really nice to have. And sometimes I miss it, but not really.
But it was a good thing to do, I think.
Yes, for
but
sure.
you're mentioning you were 21, so it was quite early in your career. Not everybody is getting picked at their 21s to do a daily comic in a newspaper that was like quite well spread. So can you tell us a little bit like before that? So how did you make that happen, that at the 21st you already could do this? Did you draw a lot?
Of course. Yeah. So I think I started drawing when I was like 5 years old, 6 years old, and like all kids, I started drawing. I started drawing the cartoons I saw on TV and the comics that I read at home, but I just never stopped doing it. I never stopped loving it. At some point, most kids think, oh, comics are not cool anymore. Now I'm going to do video games, but I just kept on reading comics. So, through my teens, like all the time I was drawing. And I also chose to study animation to get better at drawing, get better at storytelling, also with the idea to get better at comics. And I think we're going to talk about that later, but there are a lot of similarities between comics and animation. And after a while, when I was doing my own little comics, I thought it would be cool to have this, for sale and people being able to buy this comic. So with a group of friends, I made these little small press comics. So we would just draw our own comics and then print them and just sell them at comic events.
Kind of independent publisher.
Yeah, it
doing
was
your own
really
work.
independent,
Yeah.
and so we put all our own money in, and then everything we earned during those festivals and events was also for us, and it was really, really interesting and very good to learn, what you need to do to make a good comic. But also, I made a lot of friends that way because there were so many people at the time, and still, who are making their own little comics and selling them at these events. So that's how it started. I think I was like 14, 15 years old when I made those first little handmade comics. And I think I did that for 10 years or something. It was it's something that I miss sometimes because there is ultimate freedom. Because you are the editor, you decide what you can do and what's in the comic. You decide how many pages it is, how expensive it is. And these days, I'm also making comics, but with publishers who have to take a certain risk and put a lot of money in, and so you have to ask them
really
permission for
business in
everything.
that sense.
Yeah, it's different. So I can miss those days of the small press comic sometimes.
Yeah. Hey, but from 14 years old, so how did you came up with stories then? I can imagine like when you're 14 and you want to draw, but making your own books already, etc.
Yeah, I think I was really, at that time, really inspired by manga and anime movies, the Japanese movies. I really loved the comics that were made in Japan. I read almost everything, every genre, and that really inspired me to do the same kind of comics. So the first ones for me were also a bit in that manga style. But that changed very slowly to something that was a bit hybrid, so in between Japanese, European, American comics. But I think I just read a lot of comics, and then the stories would just come up to me. I don't really have an explanation of how that happened.
No, I can imagine that. But I was, maybe you are attracted to a certain kind of genre when you were 14, for example.
Yeah, I think at the time I read a lot of action horror kind of manga. So Junji Ito is a very famous manga author, and I really loved his work. So they were all a bit creepy and a bit like a thriller, or it wasn't like a romance story or something. That was not my kind of thing. It had to be
Bringing your fantasy to paper.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. Hey, and you also illustrated a lot.
Yes.
These is like some examples. This is not. That's why I'm asking you like what little bit the background. This is not manga. But can you tell us a little bit like about this work?
Yeah. So of course, my biggest love and passion is comics, and still is. And like I said, I studied animation, but illustration is a kind of work that any animator and any illustrator and any comic book artist can do, because what you need to be able to do is to draw these little figures, draw the backgrounds, you have to use color. And so I know a lot of comic artists, for example, who also do illustrations for school books or children's books, or I don't know, like educational books for grown-ups, anything. So it's the kind of work that I tend to do, when I don't want to think about longer stories like a comic or animation. That's usually a lot of work. But an illustration, I can finish one of those illustrations in one day, and then it's done, and I don't have to think about it anymore. Whereas a comic could take up to 3 years. So it's such a long process. And sometimes doing illustrations like this was for a math school book. And so you see a lot of little things happening, in a lot of details. And in this book, the children had a lot of like little assignments that they had to do with these drawings. So that was a lot of fun. And it also sparks your creativity. You have to think about, okay, this is the assignment for those kids. How am I going to incorporate that into a drawing? that's fun to look at, you know, because they have to enjoy this lesson. They don't have to think like, oh my God, this is maths, I hate it. They have to feel a kind of spark when they do it. So it's, you know, it's nice and quick, and it's very, very insightful also.
Yes, because I think you can learn a lot, because when you're doing, for example, like comics or animation, you work in serial of images, so you create a lot, and that's how you tell a story.
Yeah.
And within an illustration, you have to tell the story in one single image.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that this is also for you a kind of a training.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I can enjoy it really, really, because it's so short and because it's so fast. And sometimes in these school books, the only drawing they need is an apple tree with 3 apples, and then they need an apple tree with 5 apples. And it's so easy. I can just put on music or a podcast and draw a little tree with apples, and it doesn't even feel like I'm working. And that's one of the things that I really love about drawing this way. It's, you know, you don't have to think so hard about the drawing. There are not so many consequences if you screw up, you know, it's relatively simple to do.
But that's training, right? I don't hear it that much on this table. That actually what you have in mind, you don't have to think that much, so that it's actually going quite fluid from your imagination or your brain to the paper. So what do you think is the method behind that? Because some people are still struggling with like perspective or how to draw it, but for you it's quite easy.
I don't know, because if you look at the second drawing, the perspective is not really. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's not my strong point.
But this is a different approach for you.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I don't know. I think with most things, the most important thing is that you spend a lot of time doing it. I spoke to another comic artist once in the UK, and he told me that the best advice he ever got about comics was just spend 10 years doing it. Don't go to this class or that class or buy this book or watch that film. Just do it for 10 years. And then you've had so much experience. You've drawn little dogs, you've drawn people, you've drawn houses, all those things that you draw in 10 years, and then you can do it. So there's not like one simple way or like 5 steps that you need to do in order to be able to draw an illustration or a comic book, I think.
Yeah, because that's also sometimes a little bit the problem with upcoming talents and students, etc. They actually want to have that kind of result immediately now and then, but it's like a lot of work before you can draw what's in your mind.
Oh yeah.
And in that sense, I sometimes compare it also with like learn to play guitar or piano. First you really have to find the notes, and then etc. And then when you do it like for a long time, you can actually play from out a kind of an emotional state.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Like you're mentioning with like, I can just put on like a nice music and I can start drawing.
Yeah.
It's the same as like toggling on your guitar and just let your soul speak through your instrument.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And at some point you have the experience to know certain things that work, that always work. For example, 2 colors that always work well together, like a certain kind of purple with a certain kind of green. And you just know, oh, if I use these 2 colors, they're going to look good, you know? And that's also experience. So it's also the muscle memory. So you've done it so many times that you can do it automatically, but also kind of knowing, oh, this is always going to work. If I take this camera angle, this is going to look this way, or, you know, you can use that experience in your favor.
And when you tackled all that kind of technical issues, you can actually bring drama in it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Hey, and this has a kind of specific drawing style, but you are also do quite a lot of different approaches and drawing styles. This is different, a totally different approach. Is that something that you always, in that sense, wanted to explore? Like, this is my story, so I'm really looking how I can visualize this in the best possible style, or is it like is there something like the Aimée de Jongh kind of approach in visualizing it?
Well, I always tell myself that there isn't, but then everybody who sees my drawings always says, oh yeah, I saw immediately that it was yours. So I can try to do a different style, a different approach, different material, but people will always see that it's mine. And I remember a quote from the photographer Anton Corbijn, who said that you don't look for the style, but the style is looking for you, and the style will find you. So it's something, of course, a drawing style is a result of years and years of reading certain books, reading certain comics, in my case, watching certain films, and then taking little pieces from that you like. So it's kind of a recipe to a dish, you know, and so I always make my own dish with those ingredients. And it's always different than yours or someone else's. So of course, you know, even if I use oil paint or something, people will still see that it's mine probably because I use the colors that I like or the composition that I like. And so I try, like what you said is true, I always try to look at the story and then choose the style. So these are drawings that I made for historical projects. And so for historical projects, you need maybe a little more realism to convince the reader that this was real, this really happened. Like the immigration in Canada in the 50s, and this was a concentration camp in the 40s. So if I would do that with a cartoony style, with big eyes and big noses, then nobody would take it seriously, nobody would believe it. But by choosing something that's a bit more realistic, you can tell the reader or the viewer, this is real. You know, it's a drawing, but it actually
I think that's
happened.
one of the biggest challenges, right? To make your drawings believable. That people actually forget that it's drawn, but they actually step into that visualized world or that visualized story.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
And some people also say that like a kind of a handwriting sometimes appears because it works around what you think is difficult. So you're trying to find creative solutions. Like when some people find like perspective difficult, they don't use perspective, and that becomes their handwriting or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
What do you think is what's for you still? And I know you're always critical. What is still for you a big challenge when doing illustrations?
Oh, I would say perspective for sure, because I just don't like it. I think that's the key to anything. If you like it, it goes automatically. You know, you enjoy it, so you will do it well. But if you hate it, like I hate perspective, and I just try to avoid it always, but I can't. Well, in this image I could because it's kind of flat, but normally you can't avoid perspective. So I guess you could always tell in my drawings the parts that I didn't like, the parts that I liked. And I remember from a while ago, I think a couple of years ago, I didn't like drawing backgrounds. I only liked drawing the little characters. You know, like some people have that as well, and they become a character designer so that they only have to draw characters for a living. It's perfect. But I chose to be a comic book artist, and in every panel you have to have a background because they have to walk around somewhere, they have to live somewhere. So I chose the wrong profession maybe. But you know, with the years I learned to do backgrounds more, and now I've learned to love them too. So I guess, you know, sometimes it's also good to force yourself to learn something that way.
Yeah, find your solution for it. I showed some examples of illustrations, and it also is a nice bridge to the next topic that I would love to discuss with you. I already introduced you on this interview that you do many things, like animator, storyboard artist, illustrator. It's like it's a step. You studied animation, but also you did like a lot of storyboards. What do you think is like the big difference in it for like when you work on a storyboard or, for example, working on a comic book?
I think so. The biggest difference for sure is that I work on a comic alone. So I'm the director basically. I choose what the scenes are, and I choose what the scene is and what it looks like, where the camera is. But as a storyboarder, you're not in charge. You're working with a script, and you're working with the director, and the director is always telling you what to do. Sometimes with a little drawing, sometimes just, you know, in conversation, like, oh, I want this scene to look like this or like this. And that's very different. So you have to adapt to someone's wishes, and sometimes you can challenge them. You can say, well, I have a better idea for the scene. What do you think? So you know, it's very different. It's maybe it's a process that's more rich than working alone, because you actually work with somebody, and you can have new ideas. You can have a good conversation about the artwork. And I guess the biggest difference also is that the storyboard is just a part of a process. Nobody will see the storyboard when they watch the final film or the final series. It's gone. It's only something that is used during production. So only 10 people will probably see it. And I guess that is sometimes frustrating because I put a lot of time and effort in those images and only 10 people see it and it will be gone forever. But at the end, you know, the movie or the series that you work on, it is a group effort. It is such a big team of people doing the same thing, doing a little part for, you know, the bigger whole. And so that's also rewarding to see the final result because it's always something you could have never done by yourself.
But a few weeks ago, I had Piet Kroon as a guest during Playgrounds in Depth, and he was telling that he was like really happy that he's like always in the beginning of shaping a story and working around it. Is that also something that you find the most interesting part of doing this kind of films?
Oh, I think so. I think the concept phase is always the phase that has the most freedom, as you can go all directions you want to go. There's so many options left, and the further you get into the process, the more you are just working things out in detail. Mm-hmm. So I guess the most exciting part is the concept phase. So I can understand Pete, you know, when he says that. And as a storyboarder, the nice thing also is that you have a bit of weight in that process. You can tell the director, "Oh, I like to draw it this way," and maybe he says, "Oh, great, you know, good idea. Yeah. We're going to use that." And then in the final series, it's going to be your shot.
I can imagine that you directing yourself as well in your comic books. You like that kind of dialogue.
Yes, but I don't have it.
Oh no, but I can imagine that if you're working, for example, with Hisko Hulsing, somebody you storyboard for, that you actually are discussing the scene.
Yeah.
So you can learn from it, right? By discussing it. So it can be like enriching your view on how to tell a story.
Yeah, definitely. And also the fact that a director or a scriptwriter is writing a story with a different purpose than me. So if I make a comic book, I think about, oh, as an artist, I want to draw these panels. Like I love drawing nature, so it has to be in a forest, or it has to be in I don't know, on the beach or something, because I like drawing that. But if you are working with a scriptwriter for a TV series, they'll just write a scene in a supermarket because they need it for the plot. And I can really hate drawing supermarkets because there are so many products that you have to draw. You know, it's hell for anyone. But you know, as a storyboarder, you just have to do it. There's no other option because it's in the script. And even though I hate drawing those scenes, I do it, and then afterwards I think, oh, okay, so now I've learned how to draw a supermarket, and next time I'll be quicker. You know, I know what to do. I know how to solve these problems that I had. So I'm always happy, you know, at the end, I'm happy I did it. But, you know, sometimes you just have to draw the stuff you wouldn't do yourself.
Can I summarize it maybe as that you're doing like storyboarding and illustration and animation to become a better graphic novelist?
I don't know. Because the media are so different.
Yeah, but you pick, it's kind of cherry picking that you learn this from illustration, you learn this from storyboarding.
Yeah.
You approach animation in a different way, but some elements can be really interesting to also incorporate in graphic novels.
Yeah. Well, definitely I use the things I learn in storyboarding for the graphic novels, sometimes even unconsciously, but I think it definitely works that way. I wouldn't say that I take those jobs, you know, with the goal to become a better graphic novelist, but it happens automatically.
Or to refresh your ideas and to learn.
That's true. Yeah. So sometimes when I've worked on a book for years, I really love to do a storyboard thing because it's so different, and the script is something entirely different. Like Undone, this is a storyboard for Undone, a TV series. And it's a series that is based in the United States, you know, in a suburb of Los Angeles, I think. And it's, you know, it's so different from anything that I've drawn in my comics. And I love diving into that world and diving into those characters that aren't mine. and also to learn from all the other people on the team, because everybody on that team is amazing. They're great artists, so it's also sometimes feels like going to school or something.
Yeah, I can imagine because yeah, you work when you do a graphic novel like we are going to discuss a few of your titles. It's quite like an isolated surrounding, right? So it's you, maybe a podcast or a nice
Yeah,
music,
yeah,
a cup of coffee or tea, and it's you all the time
yeah,
in your room. And
yeah.
so I can imagine that this kind of different pace and working with people, you need it actually to renew your energy to do
Yes,
this kind of long
to not go
trajectories again.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you're right.
Is sometimes that you feel the need to do a storyboard because you can't get yourself started in a new project?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I like to go back and forth. So I like to do animation for 1 year and then do comics for another year and then go back to animation. You know, the variety keeps it fresh and gives you new ideas, and you can look at the medium with fresh eyes. It's something sometimes that needs a bit of distance, and that goes for animation and storyboards as well as for comics. You need
Hmm.
sometimes to take a step back
Hmm.
and do something else and then return.
When you draw for animation or an
Hmm.
illustration, does it play in your head as a film?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Well, of course, for animation and for storyboarding, that's very useful because it's going to end up as a movie. Um, and I always remember that scene in the documentary about Hayao Miyazaki. I don't know if you've seen it,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he's
sure.
he's sitting behind his drawing table with a stopwatch, and he has his paper in front of him, and he's just drawing the scenes, and then presses the stopwatch to see how many seconds the shot takes, and he's really like almost real time, seeing the movie in his head and drawing it. And after 1 day, he has the whole storyboard with the time frame, everything. It's maybe, not to compare myself to Miyazaki at all, but
Right.
that's also how I work. So I kind of visualize the movie in my head, and I start sketching, and I basically sketch what I see in my mind. And of course, that's not the final draft. I have to go back a million times and change things, but usually the first concept of a animation or a comic is set up like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you start on a project, I can imagine, I try to imagine, it's you trying to
Yeah.
visualize your brains, your thoughts,
Yeah.
and organize them with little, they call it in the industry, they call it like thumbnails or
Yeah,
thumping
yeah,
or blocking your story out.
that's right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and that's how you do it, like making huge amount of drawings and then just shift them
Yes,
and
yeah, yeah.
order them.
And they're thumbnails, so they're very small usually. They're really scribbles, so I can't even show it to other people because they can't read it. It's all just for me, and the thumbnails are also very badly drawn. They're just circles for heads, and it doesn't look anything like a storyboard, but it is the first step into translating the images in your head to paper, and from that you can go on to the next phases.
Is it for you also a kind of visual notes? So it's
Hmm.
actually trying to note how you want to do it, and then it remembers you how you want to do it. So
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, because you can get lost into details and shading
yeah.
and lighting once you're really drawing.
Hmm.
But of course, the first composition, like this image, the first composition is just really a thumbnail with like a circle and another circle on the left of the frame. So if I look at that little image, I'm reminded, oh yeah, this was the original idea. And even though, I'm tweaking the color grading and all that stuff, I still have that little reminder like, oh, this is what I intended to do.
Hmm.
So that's, yeah, I think it works that way. Yeah.
And yeah, we're going slowly. I'm showing you showing the audience some scenes of that you did part of animation projects.
Hmm.
Uh, if you're like thinking about animation, would you like ever want to direct your own animation movie? Sure,
A
because now
feature?
hey,
Mm,
why not? I think some of
why not?
some of your books, yeah, why not? I know it's a really difficult process, but I can imagine that that would work.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know because I did like these movies I made for the Rijksmuseum. Those were movies that were like 1 minute, and sometimes I made short films that are 2 minutes, 3 minutes. That is perfect because you can be a director, an animator, and a background artist, and it takes a lot of time, but not too much time. And directing a movie for me is really hard, I think, because I'm really a control freak. So because I want to do everything. Like in these movies, I did everything. I had no help from other animators or assistants. And I think the key to directing a movie is to be able to give your tasks to other people because that's their specialty and they will make it a better product. But that's something I struggle with, that control about everything. And that's something that happens in comics because I'm the only author. So that's perfect for a control freak like me. But I think for directors, you have to be a different kind of person. And you have to not only trust other people with your work, but also you have to be open to suggestions and ideas from other people. And I notice, for example, one of these books, whenever I got feedback from my publisher, first I was really, really mad at them. I got like enraged because I thought, oh, you don't understand me, and this is great. Why don't you see it? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. After a couple of days, I could see that they were right.
Because it's so personal as well.
It's so personal. And of course, they were right. So after a few days, I mailed them like, yeah, you're right, I'll change it. But as a director, that's not something you can use. You have to be a different kind of person. So maybe in the future, if I'm older and more relaxed, I can do that. But for now...
But I think it's an interesting subject because reading your books, they are so detailed. So I can imagine that when you, how do you say, they are so I don't know the English word, cinematographical. I don't know. But when I read your books, it's a film.
Yeah.
For me, and it's a well-told film, and like with the book we're going to discuss, it's really well documented and really carefully done, but it's also already really clear. So I can imagine that you would be the director. You say, okay,
this is it.
I want to have this one animated. I can imagine that could work.
Yeah.
Or not, but it's a dilemma.
I don't know because I think. Maybe, but I also know, for example, this book, The Return of the Honey Buzzard, was adapted to a film. And I was very happy, I was very honored because it doesn't happen a lot. It was a live action movie. And so they looked at the book this is from the book. They looked at the book first as a kind of storyboard. So this is exactly what you say. Here's the book, this is a storyboard, good luck. But what they found out is that it doesn't work that way. So you can't take these images, even though they feel like a movie, you can't take them and put them after each other in a movie. And one of the reasons is that in a comic, you have the images next to each other. They work together, they form this composition together, like a dance of different images. But in a movie, there's only one image at a time. And once that image gone, there's another one. And once that one's gone, there's another one. You've already forgotten the last one. So there's no dance. It's just a matter of timing. And there's one writer who wrote about comics, Scott McCloud. He did many books.
Important book, everybody should read it.
Yes, so he wrote many books about the theory of comics. And he always says that what space is in comics, so the space on a page, is time in movies. And it basically means that you can't very easily take a comic book and turn it into a storyboard because suddenly there's a time frame. And so I think the idea is good, but practically it wouldn't really work that way. I think you would still need to do the whole book in order for it to be a good storyboard.
I like discussing this because it's in a way it's good to hear the difference between the different kind of media.
Yeah.
And it becomes more and more important, right? Because there's like a lot of how do you say, content nowadays on different kind of media, and they so-called hyped kind of quote is like media is the message, so that it's still like a total different experience in your opinion.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And also the what you say is true. The media, the medium is the message. If you are reading a comic book, usually you're on your couch, you know, you're relaxed, or you're in the train or
Mhm.
whatever, and you have this book and you have to turn the pages around. And this is one of the things that Junji Ito taught me, the famous manga author, because he uses that gesture of turning the page in his work. So, for example, he would end with a cliffhanger on the bottom of the right page, and you'd be very curious, oh, what's going to happen next? But you can't see it yet. You have to turn the page, and so it feels like a movie in which you can't see forward in time. You can't see the next still or the next frame. But that's the only moment in a comic where you have that effect. It's the end of the page and then the beginning of the next one. And so that's also something that I use in my comics. You could call it a cinematic technique.
Yeah,
Cinematic
yeah.
technique.
It's difficult
That
word.
one.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe that's the only one that works that way,
Yeah, yeah.
because normally on a comic page you see everything already. It's on a page. And a movie, animation, yeah, sometimes you watch it on TV, you watch it in a theater. The whole experience is different. You have sound, you have music. All these things work together to create an atmosphere. So yeah, they're very different media.
But I also think is really nice in kind of looking for the balance. You're just like describing making a graphic novel is it's a dance. So it's also about timing. It's also like really plotting this story in a visual way, but also thinking about how I'm going to tell that story because
Yeah,
the so-called page turner has a kind of purpose in the whole storytelling.
yeah,
Also leaving things out. So in that sense, like a movie can sometimes, if, for example, translating a book into a film, people can say like, "I love the book better,"
yeah, yeah.
because in their opinion, of course, it has to say something about the directors and the actors, etc. So like a lot of elements that makes a good movie a good movie. But in a way, the imagination of the person while reading the book and the
Yeah,
context of reading the book had a different kind of experience, even
yeah,
though it's the same kind of story.
yeah. Of course, yeah.
So leaving out some information, how do you balance that? Because I think that's an important criteria of telling a story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So one thing I like to leave out is the dialogue. So people talking
Hmm.
is something that in the old and classic comics is done a lot. So you have all these word
Yeah.
balloons that are full with text, and then there's like one little head that is saying those words, and then the next panel is another little head who is saying a lot of more words. And so sometimes you read those old classics and you're like, yeah, why are there even drawings in this? Because it's just text. The only reason that there's drawings is to show who is saying the text. That's it. And for me, I like to take a different approach and think like, okay, when I need dialogue, I will use it. When two people are talking to each other, it has to be a natural conversation. So not like Tintin, for example, who's just thinking out loud the whole time, like, oh, let's go around this corner and see what's here. Nobody talks like that, you know. So in my comics, the conversations are natural, and if people are alone, like in this scene, they're just not talking, and there's no text, and nobody is describing the scene for you because you can just look at the images. And so I let the drawings do the talking, and the more books I make, the more silent they become, I think.
Yeah, but it also is a big influence visually, right? All those text and all those balloons,
Oh
etc.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you're talking about a dance, like if you're trying to design a dance and tell a story, these
Yeah,
were like all kind of intervening
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the storytelling in
Yeah,
that
it's
sense,
true.
right? So it's
Yeah.
inflicting your dance. It's like you're dancing and somebody's tapping on your
No,
shoulder all
that's
the time.
true. It's true. And if you would compare it to a movie, it's like there's a voiceover all the time.
Yeah,
It's so annoying. You know,
yeah,
it's one of the
true.
things I hate in movies is when there's a voiceover
All the
because it's
time.
so unnatural. There's no voiceover in life.
Yeah.
So it always feels unnatural. It takes you out of that world, you know? If there's a narrator, like it doesn't feel natural. So I try not to do that. Sometimes it's necessary, but I try not to do that.
Do you use also your experience from? Maybe I'm totally wrong, and maybe I'm constantly totally wrong because we have also discussion about it, of course. But it's the show not tell idea of animation as well, right? So you try to tell it visually, and if most necessary, you will use some dialogue. But it's actually also in your gesturing, you try to make it visual because it's visual storytelling.
Yes, no, that's true. That's a very important rule. Yeah. And it also, if you follow that rule, show, don't tell, and you go a bit further into what it means, basically what you can do is also use it in a more complex way. So for example, if a character is saying, oh, how are you? And somebody else saying, oh, I'm doing great. But if you look at the image of this person saying, oh, I'm doing great, and he's looking like this, he's got a bent back, he looks sad, you know, you can see his eyes are a bit red, so he's just been crying, I don't know. Then what you're doing is you're saying one thing, oh, I feel great, but you're showing another thing. And so immediately that's an interesting image. And I use it for one of my new projects, which is about refugees in Europe. It's fiction, but it's based on the real thing that's happening in the camps in Greece, for example. And what I saw there was a lot of walls with graffiti on them. It said, refugees welcome. And those were graffitis from the days that they were actually welcome. In the beginning, 2016, they were coming, they had nowhere to go, and the Greek people said, oh, you can come here. But there were so many refugees, and more, and more, and more, that at some point, they weren't really welcome anymore. And on those same walls, they built bigger walls with barbed wire to keep them out and to keep them locked in the camps. So if you draw a picture with that wall with the graffiti, refugees welcome, but with a barbed wire on top, that's an interesting image. And you have something that you show and something that you tell. And there's a tension between them. And that's how you create, I think, the most interesting images. And that's also what I think is the meaning of show, don't tell.
And there's a conflict. So when there's a conflict, things starts to move.
Yes.
Normally, in that conflict,
oh, definitely,
it should move because there's that's a story without an ending in Greece. But the conflict actually triggers your imagination. So what's going to happen now?
Yeah, exactly. You ask yourself who wrote this and why did it change and how long did it take for it to change? You know, so with one image you can ask so many questions and keep the reader engaged. And you also ask something from the reader. You ask them to actively read.
Yes.
You know, to look at something and also question things and not just like the way you watch a movie, just passively sitting in a seat and let it go by. You have to actively look at it and think about what you see.
And that's also the space in which you make the reader part of your book.
Yeah.
So is that interaction that you're looking for? That people are like, it's not just like popcorn. It actually asks you to try to understand what you're saying.
Yes.
So it has that different, the extra layer in your storytelling that people give it space to fill it in themselves.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And I hope I know that not all readers are like that. I know some readers are quick readers. You know, they like to just go through a book very quickly, read all the text, don't look at the images. But there's always a group of readers that take time to read a book, maybe read it twice, maybe read it 3 times, and see different things. And maybe that's the audience that I'm doing it for, you know.
Hey, we go to this one, Blossoms in Autumn.
Yeah.
My French isn't that good, so I say.
Yeah, no, so the French title
is also
different.
Here. This is like translated in many different languages. Can you tell us a little bit how you came up to that story?
Yeah, so this wasn't my story, so that's the easiest answer.
Yeah, but why did you took this one to make it?
Well, that is interesting because so I didn't write it. The writing was done by a very talented and very famous comic book writer, Citru. This is his artist name. And he's very well known in Belgium and France for very classic comic book series. So he wrote scenarios for Spirou. He wrote scenarios for almost every series and every comic book in every era. He's just very productive and well known. So even when I was a little kid, I was reading his work already because he was just doing so much. But at some point he changed his career. So he started out with funny comics, funny, and then he changed into more mature,
Content.
more mature stories.
Yeah.
So he was suddenly doing things about life and death, about diseases, about adoption. And so that part of his career was maybe the most interesting to me because I could see how he was using things from his own life. And the stories were always a bit magical. So it looked like something real, but it was always a magical touch to it that I really loved. And so the publisher that did my first book said to me like, oh, we can connect you to him if you like, and maybe you can work together on a project. And I thought, with that in mind, with his later books in mind, I thought, yeah, I really want to see where this goes. So we had a meeting. I went to his home. We spent a week there just brainstorming. And then he came up with this idea, which is a love story between two older people. They are above 60 years old. And they simply fall in love and they discover love and sex and everything that couples do. But the taboo is that it's, two older people who have already lived their lives, who've already had a family, who had relationships that didn't work out. People died around them, so it's a very different relationship than a young relationship because of all those things that happened and the way those things play a role in that relationship. So this, we made this book together. I did the drawings, he did the writing, and it was a very big success. For me, it was a big surprise because I wasn't really sure about it. I liked the drawings, but it was very new to me. It was the first time I worked in this drawing style. And then when it was a big success, I felt so happy and relieved. And there were so many readers who said to us, like, this is the first time I recognize myself in a comic. Because normally the hero of the book is young and pretty and handsome and strong, And this time there were two older people who were not in their best time of their lives. And, and you kind of fall in love with the characters as well. The writing is really, really good. So you really start to learn who they are, what they do, why they do it. And I think that's the magic of this book.
No, I didn't know that story. That
Okay.
that you actually did it came
Yeah.
how it was created together. I thought the story came to you or you asked it, but it's really like a collaboration.
Yeah.
That's a really nice way of working, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And so on the book it says the drawings are by me and the scenario is by him, but in real time it was really a process of going back and forth. So he had an idea, I had an idea, and we had some things that we changed because I wasn't really a fan of that idea or the other way around. So it's not a process like, oh, he writes the story and then sends it to me and then I start drawing. It's really a collaboration.
Here is the story about Les Bos, which you just already, we talked a little bit about the wall.
Yeah, this is actually it's a reportage I made for a newspaper, but it's, like you say, it's the inspiration for the upcoming book. Yeah.
Okay. There is like a huge engagement in your storytelling, right? When I read it, I see that you actually are really immerse yourself in those persons, and you want to tell like this layered story, and it's also sometimes about social aspects, like you just mentioned, like the taboo, or with the refugees. It's like highly engaged in my humble opinion. How do you research on?
Oh yeah, I could talk about this for hours because that's really difficult. The research part is not something that they teach you in art school.
No, never. Yeah, well,
So
we try.
You try, but normally they just teach you how to draw and how to ink and how to color. And but research is a different kind of thing because You have to read a lot, you have to go to places, and you have to interview people, which is something I never did, but I started doing it for this project. So I interviewed refugees in the camps, and basically that was the only way I could make this story, because if I would only base myself on news items, or I would Google refugees in Greece, I would get the same images and the same news items that everybody sees. But by going to a place, and a place that nobody goes, a place that has limited access also, and just be there for a week and spend time with those people and gain their trust and become friends even, they will share the real story with you, that a news reporter will never get, because a news reporter has 10 minutes or something for an item, and you have 7 days. So, you get a much better story. And I think those conversations were the most important thing for these kind of comics, because also to talk with someone and look them in the eye, I can't really explain it, but it is so much more useful than reading a paper about the same subject. You can learn more in 10 minutes looking into somebody's eyes than you can than spending 3 hours reading a paper about refugees. So that's really important, and I hope many more artists are willing to do this. It's a genre now. It's called graphic journalism. So it's journalism but drawn. And I feel and I sense that a lot of artists are a bit scared of it, because you have to dive into a subject. There are maybe political consequences. I went into a camp that was off limits, that I wasn't allowed in. So I took some risks to get my story. And not all artists are, looking for that kind of danger or that kind of thing. But I do hope that more graphic journalists are standing up, because it's really important. And like I said, it can show you something about the news that a news item can't show you.
Yeah, it's really the story behind the story.
Yeah.
And a much better.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it also like what you just mentioned, that stuck to me, that you're saying, okay, actually looking somebody in the eye, hearing the story, first person.
Yeah.
Then you are thinking about, like, you're trying to translate it, and you don't want to lose that truth.
Yeah.
Is it like actually trying to translate the truth, or because I think that makes it believable. The reason I think why, but that's my personal approach, we don't believe the news items anymore, because it's all the same. So you think it can't be all the same. So it's a kind of one-way news reporting.
Yeah.
And then it loses their truth, because you don't believe it anymore. And it's all about that believability. But then bringing it back to graphic novelists and graphic journalism, you draw. So it's not the real image, it's not the real person, it's a visual translation from it. So it's a balance between fiction and the real.
Yeah.
But just in the middle, are you then looking for the truth?
Always. You're always looking for the truth.
Yeah, but even in a stronger way, I can imagine.
Yeah, maybe in a more nuanced way, I think, because, for example, one of the images that you saw all the time on the news was the image of these rubber boats on the sea, with these little kids with vests on, safety vests. And that image was reproduced over and over again. At some point, that became the cliche of the migrant. But they never showed what came before, and they never showed what came after. So, for example, those people in the boat, they paid about $5,000 to a smuggler to get on that boat per person. Sometimes with a family of 5 people. So that's a lot of money. And you are in a boat with all different people from different countries, some from Iraq, some from Afghanistan, some from Somalia, I don't know, like all kinds of people.
It's much diverse.
And, so the whole story of, before they even get into one of those boats, is so complicated and so complex, and there's so much happening on that shore already. The fact that they have to ditch all their bags and suitcases, all the stuff they brought from home, They say, no, you can't take that, it's too heavy. They just leave everything. So the only thing they have when they arrive in Europe is the clothes that they are wearing and the life
stripped
vests.
from everything that they own.
Yeah, and so that's just an example. And then you are not even in the boat. So you can imagine once that boat is on the sea, or once the boat arrives at the coast of Greece, what else is happening that we don't see in the news items? So, there's so many nuances, and you can, if you take graphic journalism, you can dive into those details. You can make it as long as you want. You can make it 300 pages, and I think it's also sometimes it's called slow journalism, because it takes a long time to do.
Mm-hmm.
It could take 6 months to make, a graphic journalism piece. But it's worth it, because you have a piece that's much more believable and has more truth in it than any other.
It allows you to tell this story in a much layered way.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not like black and white. It's much more.
Yeah.
Taxi was also kind of a approach. Like it's also kind of journalism, like taxi drivers telling their stories.
Yeah. Pages from the book. Yeah, this was a autobiography. It's a funny story actually, because usually when I'm traveling, I have this little sketchbook with me that I don't use a lot because I'm drawing all the time for work. So when I'm traveling or on holidays, I don't want to draw anymore. But sometimes things happen during a trip that are so funny that I just have to write it down. Like a little memory, and I look back at these books and think, oh yeah, I forgot that, but it was so funny. And at some point, I realized I had so many stories of taxi drivers in those sketchbooks. And like 6 or 7 times that there was a taxi driver that I had a conversation with that was very funny or very surprising. And I thought, well, maybe I can just collect these in one book and make it a taxi book. And the idea in the beginning was to just draw myself on the back seat and let the driver change, because I wanted to draw about different drives in different cities in different countries. But as you can see, sometimes I'm not in the image, it's just cars, it's a landscape, it's a cityscape. But it kind of works. It works that the taxi driver is changing, the surroundings are changing, but I'm always the same. I'm always in the back seat with my seatbelt, talking. So in a kind of magical way, it became a format. I never thought it would be a format, but it became a format. And I found a way to connect the stories together with certain themes and certain subjects that we talk about, like religion or death and what happens after death. And so somehow when you read the book, it feels like one story, even though it's a collection. It's a collection, but so somehow magically the format came to me, but it was a bit of an experiment.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. For those at home, definitely buy every book of Aimee.
I hope so.
It's definitely worth. All what you already told about your knowledge and insights about storytelling and how you are really carefully think about how to tell it, right? So I really, how do you say, thorough. Then we come to the last title we're going to discuss during this interview. This is a huge success all over the world, and I think all the things that we were discussing earlier on is for me at least, come together in this book.
Yes.
So it's like how to tell a story, how to actually visualize yourself in that situation. It's in every detail. You tell a little story. It's all about the dust and how cups are turned down, and everywhere is dust, and you can't escape from it. So that almost claustrophobic experience is so well told in the book, and so well documented as well. Like the research, I'm going back to the research.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do like the facts and figures, but I can imagine this is for you a huge project.
Yes. Yeah, that was the biggest one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when do you think, okay, now I have the story, now I actually can tell it?
Yeah, that was a very long process. It wasn't one day or
No,
one
no, and of
moment.
course I say no, that's Tuesday at 4 o'clock. No, I
No.
can imagine, but like
Oh, that would be great if
that's yeah,
if it would happen that way.
I totally can. No, I understand that, of course, but I can also imagine like research. You can research on research and
Yeah.
research, and like in all the. But there is a moment that you say, okay, now I've got all the ingredients.
Yeah. So, well, there are two moments I think that were most important. First of all, so this book is about the American Dust Bowl, which
Yeah.
really happened in the 1930s, which was a series of sandstorms, a series of dust storms in the middle of the United States, combined with drought and poverty, and it was just terrible.
Yeah,
It
it was
was,
a spiral of bad events.
yeah, yeah, it was really terrible. People died. It was a disaster, ecological disaster. And I didn't know it at all. Somehow in history class, I didn't pay attention, or just nobody ever told me about
It
this.
didn't
But
reach the global history books.
I don't know. But
No.
it just, and it was a long time. It was like 10 years. So I don't know why I missed it. But I stumbled upon it on the internet on this historical website, I think, that had these historical photographs that they were coloring in. It's very popular now. And some of those photos were taken in the Dust Bowl, and they were taken during the dust storms, and they were so incredible. You had these big clouds of dust in the air, and then tiny, tiny houses below. So it really looked like a disaster movie, but it was a photograph. So that really sparked my interest. And then a couple years later, I think this was 2017.
So this, in a way, stuck in your
Yeah,
brain.
it really stuck in my brain, but I didn't know what to do with it.
Okay.
And in 2017, I visited an exhibition about a photographer, Walker Evans, who made photos during the Great Depression and during the Dust Bowl time. And he made photographs of families living in poverty in little cabins in the middle of nowhere. And he came very close to those people. Really the camera was in their face. And the cameras in those times weren't, they weren't easy to carry around. They were very big. It was a lot of work to make one photo. You couldn't
Yeah,
screw
here you
up.
can see in
Yeah,
the illustration. You
it's really
see.
a really big thing. So you can imagine that the photographer has to have a good connection to their subject in order to, drag a camera into someone's house and take a picture. So, that exhibition gave me the idea, like, oh, maybe I should take a photographer and put him in the Dust Bowl and see what happens next. What is he going to do? Is he going to just take photos, or, with all the misery and poverty that he sees in front of his lens, will it do something for him? Maybe touch him in a way? And then the story was born. So that's the point where the research started. I had to figure out, what kind of cameras were they using, what kind of people were doing those photos at the time. They were all very young. They were all like 22 years old. So okay, I'll take a very young person. They usually came from the cities, so New York. Okay, so my character is also from New York. So by doing research and more research, I slowly began to write this story. This is a work in process. It's the first one is a sketch, a very rough sketch, I would say. I do this digitally in Photoshop. This is the face after the thumbnails. So my thumbnails really look nothing like this. My thumbnails are really, really basic. This is a sketch that shows me like, oh, this is the angle that I want, and this is the expression that I want on the face. And the next phase is the line art. So as you can see, it's much more detailed. There are so many little lines and details. You can see the background, foreground, the difference between that. And this book is in full color. So after this, there's even another phase of color. Yeah, you can see. But this is nice because you can see the line art and then the colored art.
Yeah.
This is all digital, by the way. I did use some textures, some watercolor textures, to make it look like it was done on paper, but it's fake.
Yeah, it's
It's all
fake, but also
digital.
to make it even more human in that scale,
Yeah.
like to give it that human touch,
Yeah, I think
that
so.
print.
Yeah.
I can
I
imagine.
don't really like the digital coloring sometimes. It's so cold and so
clean in
it's
a way.
very clean, very perfect. And so I always go for a look that is a bit between digital and analog. Yeah, the sketch and the final page.
Yeah.
And you can see that I'm not really changing anything. You know, I add details because there was a scene before this where he would put a list of subjects on a table. So I knew, okay, I have to include that table with that list. So that's one of the only things I added in this image. The rest is basically the same. Of course, there's more detail, but I think if you would read the sketches, you would still be able to get the story. It just doesn't
Yeah,
look
the
so
story.
good.
Yeah, you get the story very well, and here you also get the atmosphere.
Yes,
Like it's
that's
like
true.
really this. Yeah, it becomes a drama.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Drama. Like this
Yeah.
is also a really beautiful example.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the projects that I love most because I spent so much time with it. I think in total it took me about 4 or 5 years, and I did a lot of research. And again, I went to that place. So I went to the United States, to the Dust Bowl area, to talk to people, to take photos, visit museums, visit experts, talk about the Dust Bowl. I talked to historians at the University of Bakersfield, so I had like a very long time of research, and that really helped me. And after that trip, I remember changing a lot of things because some things that I had in my head just didn't, they weren't right. You know, after talking to those people, I thought the scene doesn't make sense. It would never have gone this way. So I throw it away, and I was in the sketch phase, so it wasn't too bad. But you know, sometimes that's the consequence of
Is that also
research.
you, the control freak, want to have every detail perfect?
Yeah, I think so.
So you
Yeah.
check, double check
Yes.
that everything that you, because I can also imagine, I can also understand why this lone wolf perfectionist comes from, is that when you invest 4 or 5 years of your life into these kind of projects, it should last, it should work,
Yeah.
and it should be perfect because
Yeah.
it's such a huge investment that you're putting
Yeah.
into it. You don't want to make, of course, you don't want to make rubbish, but you also, when you put that amount of time in it, you want to make it work,
Yeah.
and you want that everything is correct in the way you want to have it.
Yeah.
And then it's difficult to do this together with somebody else,
Yes.
or
I
not
think
doing
so.
thorough research.
Yeah, I think so. I think to have the control and to do all the research myself, I know that I've done it thoroughly enough to make the book. Because if I would hire someone to do the research, I would always think, maybe they forgot something that is very important, and then
Yeah.
I get, the comments about it. So I'll just do it by myself and make sure it's as good as I can do it. And I think it's just a personality thing. I'm a control freak, and maybe that's why it takes 5 years to make a book,
Yeah, but
and
also,
not 1 year.
but also that it's such a high quality.
Maybe, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a fan, huh? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can say it. I can believe it's
Well, I think
difficult to
that-
say it from yourself, but
Yeah.
I think like you trained yourself so hard. You put like every detail on the right spot. Then that turns out.
Yeah.
That when you read it, all pieces of the puzzle comes in
Yes.
place,
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful document of the era there. And
No, thank you.
Aimee, thank you so much for sharing your insights and speak with us in an in-depth kind of context. I hope you also enjoyed it. I did it a lot. I learned also a lot. Really looking forward to a next title, but also I hope you will have some rest after
you.
these kind. So maybe you do a storyboard or make
Yeah,
an
maybe.
illustration or something else. But really looking forward to your next project. Wishing you
Thank
all
you.
the best. Thank you so much for joining
Thanks.
Playgrounds TV in depth. If you enjoyed this interview, please also check out the rest of what we offer on our channel, or visit the next episode of Playgrounds TV. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to buy the beautiful books of Aimée de Jongh, and hope to see you next time. All right, thank you. Have a nice day.